Good afternoon, morning, or evening, whenever you're watching this. I'm Bob Mover, and I'm here with our podcast called On the Real Side, and have a very special guest. Very delighted to have one of the great alto saxophonists and also a wonderful soprano player of all time, as well as a great composer and and a very interesting philosopher about the state of the world and the state of music, and a brilliant mind. But I'm honored to have the great Gary Bartz today with us. Hi, Gary.
Hi, how you doing, Bob?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm happy you're here and we're here. We're going to get to talk about some things I've wanted to ask you and talk about for a while. The
Okay.
music we're hearing, by the way, our theme song. Whoops, that's the sound of my Alexa. Boom, boom. It does that
Oh,
without even knowing it. I don't know how to turn the thing off. So occasionally you'll hear these homey sounds as I'm sitting in my living room. This is not a studio. If you haven't figured that out. But anyway, we're listening to a song by Walter Davis Jr., one of his compositions, which is what we named this podcast after. The tune is called On the Real Side.
okay.
And Gary and I both have quite a history with Walter Davis Jr. Um, in fact, when I was traveling with Walter as a duo, I called us the only duo in the world with a leader. Uh, so Humphrey was definitely, Walter, that was his nickname, was definitely the leader of our duo. Uh,
Yeah,
and of pretty much any situation you found him in, he had such a strong personality, right?
he knew
Um,
things. Yeah, yeah.
and you guys were making a record at that time too for, I think, was it Maple Shade Records or
Maple Shade, man. Oh my Lord. You know they lost that record.
no?
It was
That was their first.
stolen, and it was stolen out of the trunk of what's his name? Pierre Spray. That was his record label,
Oh,
Maple Shade. We spent a wonderful day down there. I remember, I never will forget that day because my youngest kid's mom was there. She came and we had just lost her. She had a dog that she had had for years. She had just lost that dog. So that was the day. So Walter was, consoling her. You know how Walter was. But
he was still warm.
he told us some stories that day. As well as I thought I knew him, he told some stories that, I said, wow. I mean, he had many lives.
He
He,
did. He did. He
yeah,
was rapping before anybody knew what rap was.
yeah, yeah.
Bong, bong, the prison stud, and long, 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 long.
But you know what? Now, my nephew, Eric Berryman, is doing a play off Broadway right now in New York called Get Your Ass in the Water and Swim Like Me.
Good name.
Well, it's a historical piece, really, because what it is, it's a poem that was written for the only so-called Black survivor of the Titanic. And he jumped in the water and swam. And when he said the so-called white people were looking, he said, come help me. He said, get your ass in the water and swim like me. So his name was Shine. So you
No,
probably heard songs about Shine. I never knew this.
but up
So,
just because my hair is curly, just
yes,
because
yes,
my teeth are pearly. It
right.
was very, let's say,
Now,
this type of song. But
so he's doing this play right now off Broadway. If anybody I would guarantee you'll love it. But what brings me to Walter Davis Jr., because one of the poems, what the play is about historical poems from the African, descendants that were brought here that they made. They were rugged, they were raw, they were a lot of cursing, a lot of, they talk about the one poem that Walter used to recite to me, and I would always ask him to say it because I didn't know it and I loved it. And you have to excuse the language, but this is what it is, and this is why the play is so powerful. What is it? Shithouse Lil and Big Dick Somebody. It's a poem about them. It's really a prison poem. It came out of prison.
Right. Walter learned quite a bit there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the exploits of a woman who she was the greatest. Well, I'll make it clean. The greatest lover ever. No man could ever please her. And then this guy comes down from the mountains, and he's like, his reputation on the other side, that no woman could ever please him. So that's what the poem is about. But they are both poems. It all started with the poem from the Titanic, but if anybody's interested, you really should see it. But that was one side of Walter that I'm wondering, how'd you learn? Where'd you even hear this at?
Yeah, well, he had, he had absorbed quite a few things. He did go to jail for a while.
I know, yeah.
And made no secret of that.
Yeah.
But, it was funny what he gleaned from the prison experience, being such a unique individual himself.
Yeah.
Unlike something anybody ever would know. By the way, I guess this has something to do with it. Art Farmer told me a Titanic joke.
Oh, yeah.
While we were on it. I thought it was very good. The Titanic, the whole thing happens, everything goes down, this, that. And one guy jumps off the ship, and it's the bass player in the band. Oh, that's right. He says, the band is in the ballroom playing Abide With Me. That's where he started the joke. And they hit the iceberg, and everybody's jumping over, pandemonium ensues. And the one guy, the bass player, well, he's got a bass. It'll float. It's wood. He jumps over with his bass. So for weeks, he's in the North Atlantic, floating around, and like just eating algae, whatever he can do to survive, and finally he's coming into shore, and there's a radio crew there waiting for him to come in, and the announcer is saying, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we have about to come in the survivor, one of the only survivors of this terrible tragedy of the Titanic. He'll be here any moment. He's riding in. He seems to be floating on some kind of wood, and he's getting closer. It appears to be an upright bass he's floating on. Let me, here he is. Excuse me, sir. I know you've been through a terrible ordeal with this horrible tragedy of the Titanic, but have you anything at all to say after undergoing this horrible experience? Do you have anything to say to our radio audience? He says, yeah, fuck music.
but that, now bringing it back, but that's related to the real thing,
right? That's what I mean. That's what that Art was thinking about that, because it was
yeah.
But anyway, Walter, you got to tell me about the record that got stolen. That's
I mean, we recorded that day, just a duo, just Walter and I. I remember one of the songs we hadn't really prepared. I don't even know why we were there, but we did Strike Up the Band. I remember that. I thought I had a copy of it, a cassette copy of it, and I haven't been able to locate it. But Pierre had taken it to New York, and it was in the trunk of the car. You don't leave anything in the trunk of your car in New York City. But he didn't know. So people broke in and they stole it. And so it never came out. But what really bothered me is Pierre never told me.
Really?
He never told me.
He never told. Is he still alive?
No, he passed. He's passed now, a few years ago. But he was, I don't know who he was. I mean, I knew him for a long time. He worked for the military. One time we were doing a recording. They recorded in his house, and like during the war. What was there's been so many wars in my life.
Afghan war.
Probably the one that Bush's war. I
just identify the war with the presidents now.
Yeah, I go by decades usually.
Yeah.
But they were talking about airplanes and the technology and who had the best airplane. Pierre comes on TV on Nightline as an expert on airplanes because it turns out he helped to build one of the really powerful jet planes. But he was always liked music, so that's why he ended up getting into the music and engineering. He loved speakers. All of his studio was all analog. You couldn't punch, you couldn't do any overdubs, you couldn't do anything. It was like a directed disc. If you like that kind of recording, that's good. For me, I like to use the technology that we have nowadays to make a record. Otherwise, you can just set up a tape recorder anywhere and go record. You don't need a studio to do that necessarily.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah, because I found too, that like a couple of times, I've actually gone into the booth, especially I was doing some singing, so I'd have to be separated from the rhythm section. And they said, you can overdub if you want, if you don't like something or this and that. And I was thinking first, well, this isn't honest, this isn't right. But then wait a minute, the whole situation of recording isn't honest.
Right. Yeah.
You're not there in a club and you want to make a live record. There's an energy that's happening.
Yeah.
But in the studio, you can't. That's an artificial environment to start with, in a way. You know what I mean? You're not.
Yeah. You want to use the technology that otherwise you don't need a studio.
Right.
And the way the recording industry has evolved, that in itself is now an art form. So now there's one art form helping the other art form, if you understand what I'm saying. So to just go in, because like Blue Note records, we used to go to Len Oliver's studio, up on Broadway.
Right. I rehearsed there for people.
Yeah. And they might have 3 bands rehearsing. It might be Kenny Dorham and Jackie in one room. Might be Herbie. It might be Wayne in another room. And Duke, this is when I was, around there. Duke Pearson would walk around and listen, see which ones, and choose which album they want to do, And they'd rehearse it and they'd go in and they'd do it in 3-4 hours,
Right, yeah.
And so, man, you know how much money the record, this is why the record labels, because I thought about it, I said, what? They say, we ain't making no money, we're not making any money. Well, why you keep recording? If you're a good businessman, why are you going to keep making a product that you say you're not making any money from? It doesn't make sense. What it is that this music has a long shelf life. They don't have to make money right now because they own the masters. As long as they own the masters, if somebody blows up it says Tina, I'm not calling him obscure because he's not obscure to me, but most people don't know. Tina Brooks, for example.
Right.
People discovered Tina, and all of a sudden, now his records, who didn't probably sell much, now 40, 50 years later, he's like, and they own that.
True Blue is now a classic.
Hey, man.
It's got, now Tina Brooks, for those of you who may not know, was a wonderful tenor player with really his own way of playing. And, he recorded a few records on his own. The one that he did that's great didn't even get released until 20 years later, and he had died already.
That's what I'm saying.
So, yeah.
So he didn't get any money. His family didn't get any money for that.
No, they didn't.
Record labels cleaned up because now that's all free money.
Well, that had to do with drug addiction as well to some extent. I think on the music side of it, because Blue Note knew, and these small companies, whatever, Prestige, all these people that, the record companies that ripped the musicians off, let's say that's what they did. Yeah. They knew that they had cats that were strung out and that needed a fix.
Just not aware of how the business worked. A lot of musicians just didn't know how it worked. That's what happened when Gigi and Donald Byrd started teaching us what, I own every song I've ever written. I've written a lot of songs. I own all of them. And I learned early because I was around those guys. And so I'd go into the record labels and I'm sitting talking to the executive about doing a record. And so he said, yeah, well, you got any original songs? I said, yeah. He said, well, of course, you're going to put them in our publishing company. Oh, I said, oh, it's too late. It's already in my publishing company. It wasn't,
No,
but
but that was what you were supposed to do. That was
yeah.
the way to do it. Now, what Humphrey used to say, what Walter Davis Jr. would call it, he'd say for the failure of us to do business, he said, well, we live in this bebop bubble.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but you got to step out of that bubble and do
Mm-hmm.
business with the world. And he said he learned that too late himself. He had done that, but it didn't happen right away. Now
But
with
you know
me,
why though? You know what they did? They knew the guys that were strung out. They would like Pete, like Hank. They did this to Hank, man.
Hank Mobley.
Yeah,
That's what I don't think Hank
they
Jones.
would pay. They would give you $50 for your song for your publishing, and then they put it in their publishing company. They give
Right.
you $50 or $100, for your song, and that's how they stole. That's how they stole all that music. And the guys needed the money because you know how if you're doing the record dates with Blue Note, you had to go through the union and all that BS. Now I learned from Philly Joe. Philly Joe never went to the union to get his money. He always got paid right on a date like you're supposed to. You
Uh-huh.
have to wait 2 weeks and a month and a half
You go
for
to that window,
and
at
to
the
go to the
union,
window
that
and,
window.
and pay them for your. You know what happened, man? This is what happened to me when I was working with Miles. I had done a lot of records and we were out on the road and stuff. So when I came back home to New York, I went down to the union to pick up my checks. Now, at this point, I'm no longer in the union. I left the union because when I noticed when I was working with Max wasn't in the union. When I was working with Art Blakey, Art wasn't in the union. Miles wasn't in the union. Nobody I was working with was in the union. So I said, well, why am I working? Why am I in the union? Why am I paying these guys all this money for nothing? And they show up on your gig somewhere, they'd say, the union guy is here. I'd say, so what?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, they would come in and it was always a so-called from a black guy, it's always so-called black guy come in, talking about, well, we're here to collect you. And so one time in D.C., at one step down, this guy comes in. There's a little club in D.C.,
I
really
remember the one step down, Andrew
iconic.
Beachy.
Yeah, very, very notable club. So he comes in and says, yeah, well, they said the union man's there. He's in the back. So I go back. He said, yeah, I'm from the, I said, man, first of all, I don't know you from Adam. You're going to come in here and ask me for money. You don't show me a card. You don't show me any credentials. You just going to come in. Just some random guy said, I'm the union guy. Give me some money. Get the So I sent him away. I mean, I wouldn't pay any attention. So anyway, so this time now I had been out on the road with Miles, and I get back, and so I knew I had checks waiting for me at the like you say, at the window. So I go down there, and now I'm not in the union, but I had my old union number,
Right.
So I go down there. So they said, okay, they had all the checks. They found them, They said, well, okay, it's going to cost you this much. So I'm saying, what do you mean it's going to cost me? I said, they're my checks. I said, first of all, I was I was just pushing it. But I said, first of all, I'm not in the union. You shouldn't have my checks here because I'm not a part of you. And they couldn't deal with that. So they sent me up to the treasurer. And I'm telling him this, I'm saying, look, I'm no longer a member of you. You shouldn't have my checks here. He couldn't do nothing with me. He sends me up to, I ended up, what was the name of the guy? He reminded me of the president of the union at that time. Reminded me of Edward G. Robinson. Cigar, he had his feet up on the desk and stuff. So what's the problem? And I told him,
Petrillo, right? It wasn't Petrillo, was earlier.
no, it wasn't Petrillo. If I could think of his name, I'll tell you. Mag, I want to say Art or Max or something like that. But anyway, so they, because I was right. I wasn't a member of them. They shouldn't have my checks.
Right.
And so the guy that would come around to the clubs to collect the money, the so-called black guy, they sent me to him and he said, look, you're absolutely right. If you're not a member, the checks shouldn't be coming here. But just to all they really want is that little bit of money. So just pay them the money and get your check and just go about your business. And so that's what I did, But that taught me a valuable lesson. I belong to After SAG now, which I joined when I moved to Los Angeles. That's a real union. The musicians, what they call a musicians union, never filed for the union papers. So they're not a union. They're what they are and what it says. Huh?
They're a federation, right? Is it something
no,
like
what it says on their card, it says Music Protective Agency.
Really? I didn't know that.
Does not say union anywhere on there. Maybe it does now, but it didn't then, I mean, when I moved to New York, I had to have a cabaret card. I had to get my photo taken and fingerprinted in order to work in any club in New York. You had to have a cabaret card, And so that's all a holdover, because the clubs are all a holdover from Prohibition. They were all speakeasies.
Mm-hmm.
The gangsters owned all those clubs. That's why they still own a lot of them.
Well, yes. Some things, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, I mean, but
they like the music.
They did like the music, Now Maple Shade, that's the other thing. I don't want to harp on that, but I had a chance for them too, because Larry Willis, who's another mutual friend of ours.
That's how I found out that Pierre had lost the tape.
Because
Larry told me.
Well, Larry was talking to me. I mean, I found out, I didn't know that was the circumstances. Larry just could be curt at times. I'd say, what happened to because he's saying, man, I'm going to bring you down. We're going to make I got a great rhythm section, we'll get so-and-so, and we'll make a quartet record. He was the A&R
man, yeah.
Yeah, he said, I got full free reign. We're going to have a ball. And then he never did anything. And I said, Larry, a few months later, what happened? He just said, it's not happening, man. That's all. And he just looked dejected. And I didn't feel like it was a good idea to ask him why. But that explains a certain thing that I've been thinking about for years. Because I remember that when Walter and I were traveling as a duo, he mentioned, he said, hey, man, I'm playing with Gary Bartz. I'm doing a duo with Gary, too. He said, I'm in alto heaven.
Oh, man. We had so much fun. Yeah.
And he was a genius, wasn't he?
He was, man. He black belt.
Oh, yeah. You know what he liked to do with me? He'd go like this. And stop his fingers like right at my nose.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And he would show that off to people. He said, watch this. Boom. I'd say, Walter, what is this? A shot in the dark? Peter Sellers movie where the Cato has to be ready at all times.
He's a black guy. He was a tailor.
He made his own clothes.
Made his own. Miles, every time Miles would see him, Miles would say, when you gonna make me one of them suits?
Well, he said he made ties for Miles and Herbie.
Yeah.
He said he made ties for them.
Right.
And he said what he liked to do with Miles. I thought it was so funny. He said, Miles, come on, Walter. And I said, well, how do you react to that? He said, I spin him around.
Yeah. And this is the story he told me that I hadn't. I mean, he told me this story down there at Maple Shade. He was how could I put it? A con man of the highest caliber.
Uh-huh.
And he said what he used to do when they would work at Birdland, he'd be at Birdland with somebody. And at Birdland, they used to have 3 bands. So if you break, your break is long, because it's 2 bands. He said he would go out on Broadway, 52nd and Broadway. That's tourist heaven. And he would stand out there somewhere, not necessarily in front of the club, but he would stand around and he would get, you know,
Panhandle.
get tourists, you know, said you're looking for a woman, you know, and he would take a guy, you know, over like on 10th Avenue or 11th Avenue in one of the apartment houses and, you know, say, well, now, you know, the lady, she's up on the fourth floor, you know, her apartment number is 11C, you know, so just go up there and tell her, you know, whatever he tells her. And now, look, if you got any money, let you know, I'll hold it for you.
Did he do that?
And he'd take an envelope out and he said, I'm put it in this envelope, you know. I'll show you. I'll seal it up and everything on it. So the guy because he said they will steal from you now. They're saying so you got to be careful. You know, I'll hold your money for you. I'll be right here waiting for you. And so he said he got so good at this that he wouldn't even try to do one. He'd wait until he got 2 or 3 dudes, and he'd take them all in a row. He said one night on the break, he ended up making $15,000. Now this is like in the 60s.
Oh,
$15,000 from 3 different dudes, man. And you know, Walter didn't exaggerate. When he told you things, it was true.
yeah.
You know? And I said, man, and then he went uptown and they partied that night. But you know who else was like that?
No.
Al Different. And they were really similar in a lot of ways.
Albert?
Albert Daly.
Oh, yeah.
Albert was like that, man. He if he told you something, it was true. You know, because some people brag, yeah, I can do this, I can, you know, and then you call them on it and they can't really do it, you know.
Right. No, but he could do it.
He could always do it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, Albert Daly's biography should have been called "Too Much Is Not Enough."
Ooh.
You know, I said
First. You're first.
first, yeah, first. You know, now you guys go back forever. You know, both Albert and Walter. I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and he was describing a friendship that he has with somebody for many years here, and he says it's almost like when I met these cats on Earth. It was like we'd known each other in some place, interim place in the universe. And we said something like, you know what? Why don't we go check out this place? And I'll know you when I see you. You know, it was kind of like that. And with both of those cats, I had this kind of feeling. I have that feeling with you too a little bit. It's like, you know, we don't know each other that well, but it's like we do in some way. We've lived kind of parallel.
Yeah. No, we're
lives.
connected. Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, you know, and you know, and that doesn't happen that often, but it happens. You know, I think musicians, because we have some kind of sensitivity to things, might be more aware of it, or I don't know why, but
I think because music is the only true religion.
I agree.
It was given to us by nature, and that's what everything is nature. But
That's what
most people they are on the edges of music. They like it. They you know, we recognize it even when we don't accept it maybe as a religion, but it is because it penetrates us because you know like you know I've got a lot of friends, Buddhist friends. They wanted me to get you know be a Buddhist. I said, but I chant every day when I practice. I'm meditating. I do that. I don't need to do that, but yeah, which I do though. But still, I don't need to do that because music is it. That's what it is.
That's right. That's funny because I met a guru once. I went to a satsang with a Swami, Satchidananda was the Swami. A friend of mine was, you know, like we have Buddhist friends and that kind of thing, like this kind of thing. He said, why don't you come to this satsang? So it was in Connecticut. We took a ride from New York to Connecticut. We go up to the ashram. And I didn't put my horn, you know, I mean, because I didn't think I'm going to not need my horn at an ashram. And it's sitting there with the guru, and my friend introduces, oh, this is my friend Bob Mover, and he's a wonderful musician, and blah, 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 this and that. And the guru was like his eyes lit up. He said, oh, you play music. How wonderful. Did you bring your instrument with you? And I said, no, I didn't. Oh, he said, you should have because I love music. And this and I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. And I had 1 minute alone with him. And I said, you know, I've been trying to meditate for years.
Yeah.
And I can't seem to get this right state of mind to find that center, you know, that they talk about in meditating. He
Yeah.
says, well, do you practice your instrument? I say, oh, constantly, 4 or 5 hours a day or more. And then I perform on it. I mean, my life is centered there. He said, you're already doing it.
You're already doing
Exactly
it.
what you're saying. He said, you're meditating for hours upon hours.
Yes.
You're concentrating in a certain way that's neither with your head nor your heart, it's with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just saying he confirmed what you're just saying about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so
Now,
that's
now Albert Daly and Walter Davis Jr. By the way, I did a record with Walter Davis Jr., which I'm very happy about.
oh, I want to hear
I've,
that.
I've had this tape from a concert we did in Salerno, Italy.
Uh-huh.
We got this gig. We were over there doing a festival, and we were supposed to go back, but Lou Donaldson had to cancel, and we got this call from Alberto Alberti, the big from Italy. That will provoke a laugh. I know, just that name. I'm not because of the sound of the name, but the person behind it.
Oh,
And
Alberto was a trip. Yeah.
yeah, he was a trip. And but anyway, we get this call and we go to Salerno, and we played this concert, and it was the perfect evening. We're out under the stars, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we got a tape recorder there, a good one, and they recorded, and we were in good mood. We'd only started playing the duo a few months before, and we'd had a few gigs, and this is like our fourth or fifth gig with it, and we're just comfortable enough, and anyway, it was a beautiful concert, and then they gave us the tape at the end of the gig. We actually stayed up till the sun. We went to somebody's house after the concert and played even better because they had a grand piano in the cat's house, and the neighbors didn't mind, so we played till like 7 in the morning. It was out.
Oh, tell me if you've ever recognized this, because you have piano player friends. I have many piano. To me, piano players are the intellectuals of music.
Absolutely.
They know, they've got it all. They got all the notes, and they can look at them. We can't.
That's
look
right.
at them.
Well, I play enough piano. I mean, I could, as I tell people, I could play cocktail piano in a bowling alley, but but I hung out with enough pianists to understand some of the fun. I mean, what you're talking about, how that's the intellectual part of it. But go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt.
I forgot what I was going to say.
You're going to tell me something.
What would we say? What would we talk
about piano players? We were talking about the.
You were saying piano players.
Oh no, I know. Every great piano player, I don't care where they are. If they walk by a piano, they're gonna have to touch it. They're going to have to open it up if they can. It can be in the middle of the airport. It can be out on the street. But this is what I've noticed. All the great piano players, if they see a piano, it can be a little beat up piano. They're gonna just have to, it's like it's a magnet. They have to, but I've seen piano players who don't do that too, but I've noticed they're never on that level of the great piano players. I'm not trying to grade anybody, but that's what I've noticed, and they'll sit there and they'll play it. I don't know whether they're trying to hear what it is about that, but it's like, I gotta hear, it's like this.
You know what Humphrey told me once? There's a really nice Bosendorfer piano at one of the concerts we're going to play at. So I get to the concert early, and I'm an amateur pianist, as I say. I'm sitting there, and I'm playing my little "I'll Keep Loving You." I know how to play a little bit of that, and I'm sitting there, and Humphrey walks in, and he says, "Get out of there." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look, man," he said, "I was waiting to play that piano. I was having fantasies about playing that piano in my room as I got ready for the gig. And I come here, and he says, I know you like to play the piano, and we do that, and I show you, we do that." He said, "But man, if you had a date with a beautiful woman, but you want a friend to warm her up."
Yeah.
So I know what you mean,
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about these piano players, this piano player thing, that's the thing that when I talk about parallel lives and this kind of thing, is not only do we have influence of piano players, but you and I have influence of many of the same piano players.
Same, yeah.
You know, I mean, including Larry Willis and John Hicks and all these other people that were deep friends of both of us, you know.
Yeah.
So, but the thing I mean to say is Sonny Rollins, for example, and I want to talk to you because I know you've got some relationship with Sonny through the years, as I do too. That's another thing. But one thing that Sonny told me once, when Jimmy Lyons died, who was the alto player for you, those of you who don't know, who played for many years with Cecil Taylor, over at Saul Fromkin's repair shop, I got into a beautiful duet one day with Jimmy. We were both getting our horns fixed. And while we were both trying out our horns, we played this beautiful 10 minutes or so free duet that we just played, and you know, and it was a beautiful moment, you know. So when Jimmy died, I was talking to Sonny, and I said, it's too bad, you know, about Jimmy Lyons, because he knew Jimmy too. And he said, you know, that Jimmy Lyons, I won't imitate him, no. That Jimmy, he'd get mad at me. Jimmy made me understand Cecil Taylor. He said, I never really understood what Cecil was doing. And Jimmy made it clear to me, made me make some sense out of Cecil Taylor. And then Sonny says, and then I thought, I love when he said that. He goes like, and then it gave me the idea that piano saxophone players are translators of pianists. He said, for instance, Coleman Hawkins, Don Byas, and even Bird to some extent were all translating Tatum. They were, you know, attempting to translate Tatum. He said, and then he said he was adding to him Bud and Monk were the cats he was translating. He said, and now you've got all that, plus you've got Albert Daly and Walter Davis and the people, Kenny Barron
and McCoy.
Exactly.
And it's funny because, and they're both Sagittarius, McCoy and John Hicks. They were the first piano players for me that knew how to comp behind a horn player when the horn player was playing free. You know, because so that I couldn't do that with anybody else, because when Ornette came to town, Ornette just, to this day, Ornette, people don't understand Ornette. Just like Sonny was saying about Cecil Taylor, how it took him to understand. People still don't understand Ornette, but Ornette was the only guy, especially alto player wise, that understood Bird. So that's why he didn't have to play like Bird. He understood what Bird was doing and how Bird got to do what he was doing. And he took the main elements of that and created his own thing, like Bird had done with Prez. But Bird was so, it was like when Bird said, that's it. We don't need to go any further.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's stop right there.
Yeah.
Ornette said, no, let's not stop there. Train said, no, let's not stop there, you know? But
I think Eric Dolphy was saying that to some extent too.
Eric, same thing. Eric would say that. You know, a lot of guys were saying that, but Bird was just so, he just, you know, you just want to do that.
Well, even Lee Konitz was saying it in a certain way too. Even Lee Konitz was saying it in his
absolutely
way as well.
Yeah.
You know, I was saying that, you know, but
yeah.
I mean, and well, you know, those cats gave you a feeling, because I mean, why play at all after you hear Bird? I mean, there's almost
but it's fun because like I'll play Bird, so like I use Bird solo as a warm-up, because just like Bird learned, and so we did, and Eric and I used to practice with Bach well-tempered clavier. We had duets. We had found these duets. Oboe, really, they were oboe dudes.
You and Eric Dolphy?
Yeah. I'd go down, every Wednesday I'd go down to his loft, and we would try to play these things. These things were so hard, man. I mean, it's ridiculous, but what it was what Bach had written. He didn't sit down and write this stuff down. He played it just like we're doing it, you know. So nowadays, I mean, like that's where Bird always, so I understand, he always had a Bach book with him, you know, that he would study out of.
The Bach partitas, Walter Bishop told me.
Yeah.
Said he had these Bach partita, violin partitas. And he told Walter, he told Bish that he said, well, we're essentially doing the same thing. We're making melodic lines out of harmony.
The triplets that, I mean, you see those compounds that Bach wrote, you know, diddly you know, I mean, that's all. They just didn't have drums. They didn't have a rhythm section.
Yeah.
The rhythm, the drums, the last advent, or the last innovation in music was the advent of the drums. Because once you bring the drum and put them all together, you got a cymbal. Because before that was the marching band. One guy had the bass drum, one guy had the cymbal, one guy had the snare. Each guy had. Now you put them all together. One guy's playing all of those, and moving. You could move music in a different way. And
yeah.
But when you add the advent of those rhythms to the compound harmonies and the compound rhythms that Bach was written, that's what, you know, the melding of that is what gave it. And people still they can't play it because it's too hard. Nobody can play bebop nowadays. Nobody's playing bebop.
Hardly anyone.
I mean, it's too hard. Those guys, they lived that life. They didn't go to school and play. This was, you know, they were in the trenches. They were doing this stuff all day, but they said like Monk would, if he was writing a song, and I'm kind of like this, it's like you're a fanatic, man. You know, once it's in your head, you cannot stop until you satisfy yourself.
Yeah, well, that
stop
you know, that can work both ways. I remember a girl told me once, who was also a musician. I said, maybe you and I could be, you know, I made the suggestion that since we got along, we might be nice on another level. And she said, oh, no, I could never be with you. I said, well, wait a minute, why so definitive about it? She said, because you're a fanatic. I couldn't live with a fanatic. She said, I could live with a musician, but not a fanatic, and you're a fanatic. So I lost that one.
Well, that might have been good for both of you.
I think it could have been. You know, I try to be an optimist myself.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, Bach was saying it all. You know, I mean, when one time the only time I met Warren Marsh, he was playing with super sax over at Buddy's place when Buddy Rich had that club for a while. Oh, and yeah. And he did Cherokee twice. They did 2 versions of Coco, and he was astounding both times. You know, he just played completely different stuff. And wow. Yeah. And I met him afterwards, and he was free. I say, hey, you're free. I'd like to take you to breakfast. Yeah. So this is like my dinner with Andre, but shorter. Yeah, I said my breakfast with Warren. So we went out. We're there, and we started talking about music. And Warren said, well, you know, it's all about the gracefulness. You know, the gracefulness to be. He said, you know, for instance, Charlie Parker shared the same grace. He said in classical music, Bach is it. Bach has every element that became jazz and everything and this and that. And then I started to mention, I said something like, well, you know, Mozart had some very good things happening too. For instance, if you listen to the Sinfonia Concertante in E flat for violin and viola, there's some double cadenzas in there with violin and viola that remind me of some of the stuff that you and Lee did. And Warren scoffed at that. He said, Mozart. And I have never, ever heard anybody say this but Warren. I hate Mozart. I said, wow, you know, I mean, that's like, you know, I hate chocolate ice cream. I mean, you
Did he say why?
Yeah, that was my next reaction was why. He said because he repeats himself. He's got the same bag of licks, and he just keeps shifting the licks around. He said, see, Bird had that, but Bird did it in much more inventive way than Mozart. And, you know, and Bach, absolutely, you know, he had some things, but he never, ever, it was so spontaneous. Mozart lacks the spontaneity. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I just thought it was a very funny thing that, you know, the other thing about Warren that I won't get too much on that, but the one thing I do remember of him, you could smoke in restaurants then. And you remember Viceroy was called the Thinking Man cigarette?
Yeah.
And Warren was called, sometimes criticized for being overly intellectual, which I
Right.
don't find that, but he was definitely an intellect.
Yeah.
And I said, man, this cat smokes Viceroys. That's funny.
Well, quite naturally, he was supposed
What else? I mean, so I thought that was funny. But Albert Daly, oh,
Mm,
also, I must say, I've left out one thing with Sonny. He did mention Coltrane and McCoy's influence on Coltrane.
mm.
Said that, even though Coltrane was into the fourths of the pen, but he said when he was talking about piano players translating, saxophone players translating pianists,
Well,
he didn't
well,
mention
you know that Train wanted Albert before McCoy
yes.
because
Um,
Albert had done 2 weeks in Washington D.C. with John, and he asked him to join the band. He that would have been in place of McCoy. That would have been Albert.
right. Well,
That,
he had Steve Kuhn in there for a minute too, which was
right? No, but he wanted Albert
that's what Albert told me.
yeah.
He
And
wanted
for the rest of Albert's life, that was his one regret. That the reason why he didn't take it was because he was working with Demeter Joe and the Red Caps. You remember that? That
yeah, I'm in Miami. They came down to Miami and
they were going to Australia. They were going all over. He was making good money with them, and so that's why he turned it down. But for the rest of his life,
oh,
that was his one regret. And he
oh,
would
Demeter Joe, for those of you who don't know, that was a singer, a jazz or influence singer,
kind of in between, yeah.
a cabaret jazz kind of thing. Ben Riley told me a story about that too. That I think Albert was supposed to be on this too, but Ben told me there was a concert, and I think it's written about in one of the books about Train, that it was supposed to be Train's band and Monk's band, and Elvin and Jimmy somehow had been clowning around and missed the train or missed the plane. So the only ones that showed up were Train and McCoy, and there was Monk's band opposite them. So somebody had the idea to let McCoy play a set of solo piano, and maybe Train could sit in with Monk. So John, oh yeah, it was Rashid too. That's right. It might have been Rashid and Jimmy. But anyway, those guys didn't make it. So John sat in with Monk for that set.
Yeah.
Ben Riley told me when they got back to New York, Train called up Ben, and he said, Ben, I'm thinking of making a change in direction. He said, I'm still thinking about that moment with Monk, and it made me decide that maybe I've gone as far as I can go with the free and modal type thing that where I've been going. He said after Ascension, he said I don't really know where I can go now. And then I got the answer. I've got to come back in. No, that's what he told Ben. So Ben told me he'll never forget it because they organized a rehearsal, and it was on Ben's birthday. And and so he said he was on his way, and the band was supposed to be Ben, and I believe it was Reggie Workman, and Albert. I think he had called Albert. I never asked Albert about that, but and Ben showed up at Train's house, and Alice answered the door and said, "John died a half an hour ago.
Oh.
I tried to call you, but you'd already left your house." And so that's an interesting thing to speculate. If after John had gone so far away, so far out, what it would have been like had he come back in for a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, and Albert would have been a part of that, and he was he was a profound influence. When did you meet Albert? You guys are both from Baltimore. Let me straighten that out. Gary grew up in Baltimore, and there's some things that I take for granted because I know more about your life, but people watching this may not know. And I will get to that earlier. Like your early roots were your family owned a jazz club, and and you're starting to play and all this. But both Gary and Albert Daly are from Baltimore, and my first exposure to Gary Bartz and Albert Daly actually was on a record. I told Gary the other day. I said that was the first record that I borrowed from someone and didn't give back. And it's a record called Libra, which was with Gary and Albert Daly on piano and Jimmy Owens on trumpet and flugelhorn, and I think Billy Higgins.
Billy Higgins.
And is it Reggie? Larry Ridley
No, Richard Davis.
Richard Davis, of course, yes. Anyway, that was such a nice record that you know, and I was about 15 when I heard it, and you know, I think Gary was like in your early 20s when you recorded it.
Yeah, what would I have been?
So the year I heard it was 1967, I think, is when I heard it. And but anyway, it, as it said, both of those guys were from Baltimore. So let's talk a little bit about your history with Albert Daly. How did you meet him?
Well, I mean, I started going around the clubs when I was 14 because I asked my dad to take me. He took me to a club called the Comedy Club down on the Avenue, Pennsylvania Avenue. And I found out Sonny Stitt was doing a matinee there. So I asked my dad if he'd take me.
Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah. So we go down there for the matinee, and place is crowded, and Sonny Stitt is playing butt off. And he gets on the mic and he says, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I understand we have a young man that'd like to come up and play with us." And so I'm looking and waiting for this. And he calls my name. And I said, "Oh, man, what did my dad do?" He had sneaked up my horn out and gone and tell Sonny Stitt I want to go up and play with him. I'm 14 years old, man.
Oh, man, that is frightening.
So I went up there, and Sonny, being the nice man that he was, he took me through all the keys on the blues. And and fortunately, I didn't know one key from the other. So I went everywhere he went. I could follow anybody, you know, because I had been listening. I had been listening. That's why I tell everybody, listening is more important than playing. Listening is more important than playing. So I had been listening without a horn until I was 11. I started listening when I was 4 or 5 years old. And when I was 11, I got my first horn. But when I got my first horn, I already knew what I wanted to sound like. I already understood how the process worked, you know, because I'd been listening so hard, and because I wanted to do that. I kept begging every time there was, "Well, what would you like for your birthday? What would you like for this?" And it was always an alto saxophone every time. So I guess they got tired. They got tired. Okay, let's get him one. So they rented me one. And so but once I got it, I could play everything. I just had to learn how to get around the horn. That was the thing, you know. That's still the thing.
Absolutely. I'm still working on that.
Yeah, you know, because it's all in here. The music is in here. It's not in that. You have to bring it out there. So you got to find out how to bring it out. But
well, you know, like, I mean, you've talked about, I like when you talk about you have to learn to trust your ears.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that, you know, you have to go beyond your ears.
Yeah.
You know, through trusting your ears.
You have to hear the future.
Yeah, right. That's what you put. Now, what do you mean exactly by?
That's what Bird did. That's what Bird could hear the future. Because when you're reaching, you know, it's that's what it's always been. It's like I'm reaching. And now, to me, it's like if you know the sound, you know the singing bowls. The singing bowl, you know.
Like the humming sound, yeah.
Yeah, so you hit the bowl, and it rings and it rings. I want to follow that. Where does it go? That's what I'm trying to follow. So that's what you have to find that, because it's there, but you can find it. So hearing is like a fingerprint. No, there's no two people that hear the same. Everybody hears different. So if you can find that, you'll sound like you, because nobody can sound like you. And that's what Miles found. That's what Train found. That's what Bird found. They all could hear the future. And so that's what we're reaching for.
That's funny, because that's what I heard in you when I was actually it was 19. Yeah, I was like 13, 14 years old when I heard you. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you didn't sound like anybody. You know, I mean, definitely I'd heard who you'd heard,
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely Bird, there was definitely Sonny Rollins was there, and Jackie McLean was
Yeah.
there. Especially, I noticed in your compositions,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'd been listening since I was like, 11 years old too, like very seriously.
Yeah.
Before I played the saxophone, I was
Right.
messing around with the piano, messing around with the drums, and singing. I would
Yeah.
sing along with records,
That's
and
important. Yeah.
and I used to sing so well, even with tunes. When I was 12 years old, I had this repertoire. I knew all the tunes, Sinatra. I mean, not all of them, but
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
Sinatra,
I listen to Sinatra every day.
me too. Yeah,
I mean, literally every day.
yeah, you still do. I mean, or
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Well, because they're songs, they're melodies, and you're not only when you're listening to that. That's why, like these young musicians today, and I don't like to talk about them because musicians are as good today as they are in any other generation. But what's happening is the educational system is leading them down a wrong path, and so they come into college, they don't know any songs. They don't know any songs. And that they're musicians.
yeah.
That's
Well, those songs have escaped our culture. We couldn't help but know songs. I'm the last generation. I'm one little generation after you, and that was the end of it. The last
yeah,
time you could go into a bar, and you could hear Tony Bennett
yeah,
or even Edie Gourmet or
yeah,
somebody, what I mean, singing
yeah,
standard tunes.
yeah.
You would hear this. And, Frischberg told me an interesting thing once. Dave Frischberg and I were talking, and he said, there's two kinds of cats. He said, people that play instruments.
Yeah.
He said, and some of it's a hybrid. It's a little bit of both. But
Mm-hmm.
let's say there are people that primarily play an instrument to play an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
They want to play that instrument. They love that instrument. And these people become often section players and,
Mm-hmm.
like that kind of studio cast.
Right.
But then there are those who are the tunesmiths who love songs and become
Right.
musicians chiefly because they love these songs.
Mm-hmm.
And the instrument, though important, is almost a secondary factor to the love of the song.
You know what I call it? You have musicians who that's their job is they make a living by playing music. They might work in a circus band, they might do weddings, but then you have artists whose medium happens to be music. That's totally different. A whole different approach, different everything. Like you might have painters, they paint signs, they'll paint your house. Then you got artists who use painting as an art form. So when they paint, it's a work of art. It could be a work of art painting a house too, if you look at it like that. But that's what's separate. Huh?
There's an art to a craft, but
yeah.
still a craft remains a craft.
Right. But when you're looking at, you're using art as you're using music as a medium to say more than just get up and dance. You're going beyond that, because that's what music basically is, for dance, for singing and dancing. There's no other reason. I mean, right. That's how it was created. Like, do you know, like in the ancient days, I mean, really ancient days, before there were societies or anything, there were tribes. The musicians, whoever knew how to play music and create music, they were looked on as the religious people. Because nobody knew how did they do that? So that was like magic. That's why I'm saying music was always religious, and it used to be looked at more, recognized as the religion. That's why for funerals, for births, you always had to have, they had songs, they had certain things they did and they played, and the musicians were always, so the right-hand man of the kings and queens before anybody else, like now it's like you would have some religious person, from a church, the Pope, but then the Pope was the musician, the guy who created the music. And I always say how far we've fallen from those days.
Well, the Psalms in the Bible are often addressed to the chief musician.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, Paramahansa Yogananda said in Sanskrit, in the language Sanskrit, the definition of a musician is he who sings the praises of the Creator.
Mm.
And that's the literal translation of the word musician, which was Charlie Mariano one night. I only got to meet Charlie a little bit, but I know you've had some experience with him. You guys made a record and everything, but you know, Charlie was such a down home cat in his way. You know, we're sitting there and I said, Charlie, you know, you went to India and you learned the Nagaswaram, like the Indian type saxophone and everything. And he was telling me, he said, he was starting to tell me about that experience of being in India and, you know, having to play this instrument. And he said, my two greatest experiences in music, one was to be able to sit in and play with Charlie Parker a few times while Burb was around. And we were on this Kenton band doing this tour and we jamming with Charlie Parker. And the other moment was when I was in India and my master told me, he made me practice outside the temple. And one day he came to me and he said, okay, you've gotten good enough to play inside the temple. And Charlie said, and this made my life. He said, I was so happy. So Charlie, you know, had that Boston accent. He still had that New England sound to his voice and everything. I said, you know, Charlie, that makes an interesting point. You know, I was reading Yogananda, and Yogananda says that the translation literally of the word musician is he who sings the praise of the Creator. So I imagine that Indian musicians, unlike their American and Western counterparts, you know, I mean, we have cats doing the same thing. I think we're all singing the praises of the Creator, but we got these substances that we get hooked on, and we got these other influences in the music. Are these cats like maybe even celibate or something, or like, you know, or like very well behaved? And I get that impression that he would be like that. And Charlie said, well, he said, not my master. The guy was, he said these are his exact words. He said, he was a fucking drunk. He died at 30.
Yeah, they were the same. You know, that's what.